Mic check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
How you doing?
Good to see you.
Nice to see you. Morning, Kathy. How you doing?
Morning. Morning.
Hey, Mike. Lord, what's happening? We're just on in Texas. Pardon me? We're just working on in Texas. No, maybe in California. But where are you going? Your mic is open. Just to let you know, All right.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Today the subcommittee is going to examine how Social Security protects the benefits of those who can't protect themselves. About 14% of those receiving Social Security or supplemental security income benefits need someone to manage their payments. Those are our most vulnerable, including children, and those who are mentally or physically incapable of managing their benefits. Most often, payees known as representative payees are family members, often a parent or a spouse. However, they can be a friend or a qualified organization, such as a social service agency or a nursing home. Sadly, there are payees who take advantage, sometimes in horrific ways, of the very people they're supposed to protect. In January this year, the Justice Department announced that Linda Weston, her daughter, and 3 co-defendants were charged in a 193-count indictment with crimes including murder in the aid of racketeering, hate crimes, and sex trafficking. According to the indictment, Weston persuaded each victim to make her the payee for their Social Security payments in exchange for promise of a place to live. Weston, aided by the co-defendants, subjected the victims to inhumane living conditions, including beating the victims, holding them captive in locked closets, basements, and attics, and moving the victims between states to avoid detection. The indictment alleges that the use of these techniques caused 2 of the victims to die, while the others were abused for years until October 2011, when the Philadelphia police rescued them from a sub-basement of an apartment building. The perpetrators of these crimes are in jail awaiting trial. As a former prisoner of war, I'm telling you, torture can quickly mangle your body and slowly destroy your soul. I lived through what could only be called hell on earth for nearly 7 years, and your health and safety is of no interest to your captors in that situation, and it breaks my heart to know the terrors these innocent folks endured right here at home in the United States. While this level of cruelty, from what we know, is rare, it's inexcusable and intolerable. Soon after these crimes became public, members of this committee asked the Government Accountability Office to examine Social Security's representative payee program. GAO is releasing this very important report today, and Mr. Bertoni is here to tell us about it. Today, there are almost 6 million representative payees who manage $72 billion in benefits each year for 8.4 million beneficiaries. Over the past 10 years, the number of people needing a representative payee has grown by 20% and will only continue to grow as people live longer. According to Alzheimer's Association, by 2025, the number of people affected by Alzheimer's will increase by 40% to reach over 7 million. And Congress last looked at the challenges facing the representative payee program when it passed the Social Security Protection Act of 2004 and strengthened the protections against misuse. The Weston case illustrates the importance of finding the right payee in the first place and the importance of effective oversight. Clearly, Social Security must do better. The agency must rise to the challenge of doing what's right to protect the benefits of those who cannot protect themselves. I thank our witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Becerra, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this is an extremely important hearing, and I thank you for holding it. Social Security has done a job for all Americans, and it's done it well for over 77 years, paying Americans their earned benefits on time and in full. So it's easy to forget what a big, important, and complicated job the Social Security Administration has and the work it does for so many Americans who rely on their benefits to be able to live in dignity. The horrific cases of children and vulnerable adults being abused and victimized by the very people who were entrusted with those individual Social Security benefits serve as a reminder that Americans pay the price if Congress doesn't provide the leadership and the resources needed to get it right. Social Security benefits currently keep more than 21 million Americans out of poverty, including more than 1 million children. About 15%, as the chairman mentioned, of those current Social Security beneficiaries, some 8.5 million people, have representative payees who collect that Social Security benefit for them. While most payees do a good job, and we're going to hear some heinous cases, but 8.5 million people have representative payees. We're not talking about 8.5 million people being abused and victimized, but there are clearly cases where there is that victimization occurring. So most of these representative payees do a good job. But when they don't, there are devastating consequences. Misuse of benefits by a payee is often part of an overall pattern of abuse and mistreatment. Quick example, an extremely disturbing case in Philadelphia involved not only the misuse of Social Security benefits, but imprisonment, slavery, physical abuse, and the death of adults with mental disabilities. Misuse of Social Security is not the only problem in these situations, but the fact that the abuse was committed by someone who had been entrusted with the victim's Social Security benefits made the cases even more horrifying. Social Security cannot, by itself, protect individuals from such predators. But given the right resources and the adequate staff, Social Security can partner with protective services and other community organizations who are charged with detecting, stopping, and preventing abuse of adults and children, both to protect the Social Security benefits that have been earned and because the assignment of a representative payee is an opportunity to discover some of these abusive situations. In recent years, SSA has begun to work more with the state protective and advocacy agencies who have deep expertise in this area and have been very helpful in monitoring representative payees and advocating for beneficiaries. But clearly, we need to do much more, particularly as our older population gets older and more people join the ranks of the aged. We have to fix the policies and provide the resources now because the challenges of protecting vulnerable Americans will only grow, as I said, as our population ages. In the coming years, a larger share of seniors will be over 80 years of age, ages at which they are both more likely to depend on Social Security and more likely to need help managing their benefits. While policies matter, you get what you pay for. There is no substitute for providing SSA with the staff and resources it needs to recruit, train, and monitor the representative payees being trusted with other people's Social Security checks. A series of budget cuts and the sequester mean SSA's budget is about $800 million lower this year than it was in 2010. Even though the number of American Social Security is serving now has continued to grow. SSA's employees have worked harder, faster, and smarter in every way they can, and have tried heroically to shield Americans from the effects of these cuts. But even with their efforts, the budget cuts have forced SSA to institute a hiring freeze at local Social Security offices and have all but eliminated their staff training budget. These local offices have the primary responsibility for finding, assigning, and monitoring representative payees. SSA estimates that this year its backlog of work related to ensuring timely and accurate payments to current beneficiaries, which includes monitoring representative payees, will reach 7,500 work years. That is, SSA would need to have 7,500 additional employees on staff working all year long in order to complete all of the backlogged work. These type of budget cuts can particularly be harmful to some of the most vulnerable Americans, those who require assistance managing their benefits. While we can and should look at policies to see if we can improve them, there is no substitute for providing the resources necessary so that SSA can effectively do its part to protect our most vulnerable Americans. Mr. Chairman, Social Security's representative payee program is just a small piece of the safety net needed to protect some of our most vulnerable Americans. It is just one of the vitally important things our government does and needs to do well. Thank you for holding this hearing so that the problem is clearly laid out. I look forward to the testimony of our witnesses and together working on this committee, trying to make sure that every American receives the benefits he earned. Thank you.
Thank you, and that they're protected. As is customary, any member is welcome to submit a statement for the hearing record. Before we move on to our testimony, I want to remind our witnesses to try to limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. Without objection, all the written testimony will be made part of the hearing record. We have one witness panel today. Seated at the table are Daniel Bertoni, Director, Education, Workforce, and Income Security, Government Accountability Office. He's the cop. Latina Burst Green, did I say that correctly? Assistant Deputy Commissioner for Retirement and Disability Policy, Social Security Administration. Elmer Serrano, Executive Director, Michigan Protection and Advocacy Service on behalf of the National Disability Rights Network. Mr. Bertoni, welcome aboard and thanks for being here again. Please go ahead with your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Becerra, members of the subcommittee, good morning. I'm pleased to discuss our work on the Social Security Administration's Representative Payee Program, which plays an important role in ensuring that the needs of the most vulnerable Social Security beneficiaries are met. Last year, nearly 6 million SSA-appointed payees managed $72 billion in benefits for over 8 million individuals, and the program is poised to grow further as the population ages. My remarks are based on our report issued today that discuss the current and long-term challenges facing the program and steps the agency has taken or could take to address them. In summary, SSA struggles to effectively administer the Rep Payee program despite efforts to address challenges with identifying, selecting, and monitoring payees. For example, due to increasing workloads and staff attrition, field office managers frequently have to perform duties that lower level staff typically handle, such as processing initial payee applications. In addition, SCA has experienced difficulties identifying payees for an increasing number of beneficiaries with mental health conditions and those who are aged and don't have a payee readily available. Unfortunately, actions the agency has taken to date to identify and recruit additional payees have yielded little results. SCA also faces challenges in ensuring that those who are selected as payees are of good character and suitable for the task. To address this challenge, SCA is piloting an initiative to screen and potentially block payee applicants who have been convicted of certain crimes, such as kidnapping, financial fraud, forgery, and identity theft. However, at the time of our review, the pilot relied on applicants to self-report this information, and SSA lacked plans to evaluate its effectiveness in preventing program abuses. We've recommended that SSA conduct such an evaluation, and the agency has concurred. SSA also faces challenges in monitoring rep payees' use of beneficiaries' funds, which is time-consuming and often requires staff to follow up on accounting reports via multiple mailings, telephone calls, and even face-to-face meetings. To better leverage its resources, the agency has taken steps to streamline this process by allowing payees to submit online reports. SCA has also adopted a risk-based electronic approach for some of its other reviews to better target those payees with a higher likelihood of misusing benefits. Despite these efforts, changing demographics and a likely steep increase in the number of beneficiaries who may need rep payees in the future will further strain program operations. However, to date, SCA has done little to position itself to address this challenge. Specifically, SCA has not taken steps to project the future need for payees, the likely characteristics of beneficiaries, or the resources that will be needed to administer the program. In our report, we recommended that SCA conduct such analyses, and SCA has agreed to develop additional data. And finally, to address growing demands for the work, we consult with various experts in identifying additional options SCA could consider to increase its pool of rep payees and better target its monitoring activities. Such options include permitting a broader range of organizations to collect fees for serving as a payee, reducing monitoring requirements for custodial parents, and enhancing coordination with other state and local organizations that serve similar populations. However, experts and other stakeholders identified trade-offs for each, mostly related to balancing SCA's desire to streamline and simplify the program with the need to protect beneficiaries from abuse. SCA has acknowledged that changes to the rep payee program are needed and has considered some options. However, the agency has not fully assessed their potential benefits, costs, and feasibility of implementation. Given the magnitude of the workload challenges associated with the rep payee program, we've recommended that SCA develop and test a range of alternatives to streamline and improve the program for the long term. The agency concurred with our recommendation. We look forward to working with them as they proceed in this regard. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. I'm happy to answer any questions that you or other members of the subcommittee may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you go to Pennsylvania and talk to them?
I did.
Thank you. Ms. Green, you're recognized.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Becerra, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to discuss the Social Security Administration's Representative Payee Program. I am Latina Burse Green, Social Security's Assistant Deputy Commissioner for Retirement and Disability Policy. Early on, Congress recognized that some beneficiaries were incapable of managing their benefits and directed us to appoint representative payees to receive and manage benefits for them. Today, around 5.9 million representative payees manage $72 billion annually for 8.4 million beneficiaries. Just over half of these beneficiaries are minor children. Mr. Chairman, you are absolutely correct that we must do better, and we are committed to doing everything we can to ensure that we select a responsible representative payee who will use benefit payments for the beneficiary's best interest. Let me emphasize that in most cases, representative payees serve their beneficiaries well and without incident. Yet we continue to expand our risk-based approach to improve the ways in which we identify, select, and monitor payees. We have implemented several initiatives to advance the payee program, including the majority of the National Academy of Sciences 2007 recommendations. When selecting payees, we evaluate an applicant's qualifications, including the applicant's relationship to and concern for the beneficiary. In addition, we look for any factors that could disqualify a person from serving as a payee. For example, A person who has committed Social Security fraud may not be a payee. We continue to advance the strength of our selection process. For instance, we are piloting a new policy in our Philadelphia region that prevents applicants who have been convicted of certain serious crimes from ever serving as a payee. Later this month, we will expand the pilot in the Philadelphia region to include use of an electronic system to obtain criminal information on payee applicants. When monitoring employees, we look for assurances that a payee is performing adequately, and we perform our monitoring activities using several methods. First, most representative payees submit an annual accounting report listing how they used benefit payments. Payees can complete and submit the form on the internet. We review those payees who provide questionable responses or do not respond. Secondly, we conduct periodic on-site reviews of state mental institution payees, organizational payees serving more than 50 beneficiaries, and individual payees who serve more than 15 beneficiaries. For payees that do not fall into these categories, we perform targeted reviews. To this end, we have developed misuse predictive models that select payees for review who have characteristics indicating a higher likelihood of potential funds misuse. Third, we contract with third parties like the National Disability Rights Network to help us review payees who serve large numbers of beneficiaries, have complex records, and whom we suspect are misusing funds. And last, we have developed an online misuse tracking system that allows our field office employees to track all allegations of misuse from the initial contact to a formal misuse determination. The system also tracks our progress in collecting misused funds from payees. And although we've done much to improve the program, we continue to work closely with our partners at the GAO and OIG. They have made several suggestions for improving our representative payee program. As an example, GAO's report cites the growing number of people who may need payees in the future. To address that, our researchers will estimate the future number and characteristics of people in need of payees and will use the data to inform our long-term strategic thinking. Recently, we established a representative payee strategic team to facilitate and advance our strategic approach to improve how we administer the payee program, including further exploring options recommended by GAO and others. And we will also work with the Administrative Conference of the United States to evaluate state guardianship practices and whether it would be appropriate and practical for us to share data with state entities. And finally, we need your help to maintain and improve the payee program. GAO and others have proposed sensible policy changes that would require legislation. Also, we need sustained, adequate funding to implement many of the suggested proposals. Like our other important workloads, we must rely primarily on trained, dedicated employees to interview and monitor the millions of persons who serve as payees. Again, thank you for inviting me to testify, and I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for being here. Mr. Serrano, welcome. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the committee, to the committee for this opportunity to present. I'm Elmer Serrano. I'm the Executive Director of the Michigan Protection and Advocacy Service, and I'm also on the board and serve as the Treasurer of the National Disability Rights Network, NDRN. NDRN is a nationwide organization that is made up of the protection and advocacy systems from every state, the U.S. territories, as well as the District of Columbia and the Native American tribes. The protection and advocacy systems were mandated by Congress in 1975, and we've been working very hard ever since. I've been working with the beneficiaries of Social Security since the early 1970s, with the ARC of Maryland, with the United Cerebral Palsy Association of Detroit, with the Pennsylvania Protection and Advocacy System, Michigan Protection Advocacy System, and I also have served on the board of NISH for the last 19 years and currently serve as the immediate past chair of that organization. I'm here to testify on behalf of the beneficiaries of Social Security who have representative payees and on the important work that's done by the P&A networks, Protection and Advocacy networks, around the country related to resolving problems of abuse, neglect, and exploitation by representative payees. My written testimony has a lot more detail than what I'll do verbally, but I do want to highlight two specific issues. One is the need to expand the monitoring capacity, and the other is more in-depth recruitment and intensified and vigorous training for representative payees. Over the years, I've seen many examples of representative payees that are simply not working in the best interest of their beneficiaries. And these representative payees come from nonprofit organizations, friends, guardians, family members, and even parents. In other words, there's no one type of representative payee that ensures integrity. We've seen both problems and heroes in all of those classifications. This is why the effective monitoring and recruiting and training are absolutely essential. In 2009, the Social Security Administration found 32 men who were working at the Henry's turkey farm in Iowa that were living in horrendous conditions. The turkey farm was also the employer and the rep payee for all 32 men. Social Security, to their credit, very quickly responded to the situation at the turkey farm and recognized the independent and unique nationwide reach of NDRN to assist in the process of protecting others from such types of exploitation. Social Security contracted with NDRN and its national network of protection and advocacy services to monitor the representative payees. And as of last March, this current year, there were over 7,000 beneficiaries have been interviewed, and over 1,500 payees have been reviews have been conducted in group homes, in board and care homes, in nursing facilities, in governmental agencies, in disability service organizations, and in sheltered workshops. It quickly became evident that many representatives payees try very hard to follow the rules. However, many others do not. After the reviews are done by the Protection and Advocacy Service, we do send the information to Social Security Administration for their follow-up. The P&As also do follow-up investigations on problems that are noted during their reviews and their visits. We find issues related to living conditions, eligibility for other services, access to services, and so on that we do follow up on. The major areas of concern that we find are improper accounting of funds, the commingling of funds into operating accounts, the poor or non-existent fiscal record keeping, and the lack of receipts for expenditures. The representative payees tell us that they need more training on the rights of beneficiaries. Well, that's what we do. We do training. We need to figure out ways to decrease the incidents where they simply say we didn't know the rules that lead to some of these questionable practices. We need to expand the pool of vetted, trained, representative payees from which the beneficiary can make a selection and have some choices as to who they want as their rep payee. We need better coordination between federal agencies to enhance the protection of rights for beneficiaries of Social Security. Department of Labor, the Veterans Administration, the U.S. Justice Department. I also recommend that the custodial parent should still be required to file to become a representative payee, and that they still be required to file financial reports annually. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, sir. We need some better rules here in the House, too, maybe. Hey, Ms. Green. Why did you pick, how long you been with the service, Social Security?
Approximately 20 years.
Okay. Why did Social Security pick Wilkes-Barre to handle this kind of situation?
I'm sorry, you mean the accounting?
Yes. Everything goes through Wilkes-Barre, does it not?
All of the accounting forms go through the Wilkes-Barre Data Center, and so...
Why? I mean, you all keep asking for more people and more...
Thank you. So initially, when we receive the accounting forms, they are submitted to us by paper. Although
to Baltimore or to Wilkes-Barre?
To Wilkes-Barre.
Okay.
So when those paper forms are submitted to us in paper form, we have a very robust scanning operation in the Wilkes-Barre Data Center. And so those forms are then scanned into the system, and the system does an electronic review of the forms.
You don't have that capability in headquarters?
We do not have that capability in headquarters. That's correct. Now, remember, the folks in Wilkes-Barre are performing a clerical function for us. Again, they're merely scanning the forms in, and as the system does its electronic review, the system generates alerts. Okay, and alerts come in two forms. Either the alerts are generated when individuals have not responded to our request for the annual accounting form, and the individuals in Wilkes-Barre will make telephone calls or attempt to contact those individuals who have not responded. But then the system also generates exceptions when in fact there are questionable responses to the form. Those responses could come in the form of, there may be some anomalies in terms of what was reported in the past versus what is being reported for this particular accounting year. And in those situations, those cases are then sent out to the field so that the field can then handle all of those exceptions. So the exceptions and the interactions with the payees are not done necessarily at the Wilkes-Barre Data Center. They perform primarily a clerical function. And so going back to your point as to why we need the resources primarily because we have to make capability determinations.
Yeah, I understand that part of it. What I want to know is why it didn't happen in headquarters instead of Wilkes-Barre. Can you all do that at headquarters?
We do not have a robust scanning operation to receive all of the accounting forms that we receive. Now, if you're referring to the Weston case, and what went wrong, are you referring to the Weston case, trying to figure out
all
what
of
went
them?
Wrong? Okay. Well, the reality of it is that whenever we receive applications to serve as a representative payee, that applicant undergoes a face-to-face interview with someone in our field office. Mm-hmm. And they're asked very detailed questions. They're also asked about their criminal history. And the reality of it is that SSA does not have access to criminal history data. So we rely on self-reporting.
Well, how did Ms. Weston, who was a convicted murderer, become a representative payee in the first place then, if you all do all that?
Through deception.
Through what?
Through deception. The reality of it is that when she underwent the application process, and we specifically asked her in each instance in which she submitted an application to serve as a rep payee, whether you have been convicted of a felony or any type of crime that has resulted in an imprisonment over a year, she responded in the negative.
So you all don't check on them after you get that response on paper?
SSA does not have access to criminal history information. We have a database called PUPS. I can't tell you exactly what that stands for, but it's basically information that we receive indicating whether someone is imprisoned. Okay. Uh-huh. We also receive data or have data readily available as to whether someone is a fugitive felon or not. We do not have access to criminal history information. Thus the reason why Senator Casey in December of 2011 submitted a legislative proposal at our request to allow us to gain access to the FBI's NCIC information. And to the best of my knowledge, that proposal died in committee.
You can't ask the FBI for that information?
We've been told we cannot use that data for the purposes of
No, but you can't ask them if a
program.
person's a criminal, has a criminal history or not?
We do ask whether or not they have a criminal history, and it's up to the person, the applicant, to be forthright with us.
People lie a lot, you know.
That's absolutely correct. And that's why we have, on our own, developed a relationship with LexisNexis to obtain information through their Accurate program to try to obtain criminal history information.
Okay, my time's about to expire. Mr. Bertoni, Social Security plans to complete its pilot program evaluation in fiscal year 2014. That's 3 years after this Weston case broke. Why is it taking Social Security so long to find an answer that works?
I think the timeline, the answer to that is probably best left to the Social Security witness. But what I would say is that our main question or concern is that why has it taken so long for the agency to pursue third-party verification information? And in our view, that probably should have been built into the pilot from the start. So now they find themselves 3 years out, just now beginning to stand up a verification system that could really inform them as to the effectiveness of this pilot. and they're not going to have that information for some time. So I would not be surprised if they didn't have enough information to even know whether the pilot's effective in 2014 and worthy of national rollout.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Thompson, you're the only one left. You want a question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. This is very, very important. Mr. Serrano, you mentioned the turkey farmer case, and I think you referred to it as inappropriate how they handled this. Wasn't it just downright criminal?
Yes.
What they did?
Yeah, it was. It was exploitation and people living in horrific conditions. I believe it was
Are they in jail now?
I believe they are. There's
And what
recently
happened to their
settlement.
what happened to their holdings? What happened to the turkey farm and their facility? Do you know? Was that
I don't know. I assume that I don't know that they're even still in business, but I know that there's been recently a settlement.
and but you don't know if they were able to keep that, or was it confiscated and sold, and these
Well,
folks who were in prison paid back?
I don't know the details of it, but I know that there were criminal charges filed and justice was sought. It was criminal, absolutely criminal.
Ms. Green, so you don't do any background checks on people? People just come in and say, yeah, I'm fine, I'm law-abiding, and put me in charge?
That is correct. Currently, we rely on self-reporting.
What is the, what would be the problem with doing background checks?
There is no problem with doing background checks.
Why
We
don't you
do
do
not
it?
have access to the data in order to conduct the background checks. And so, as I mentioned,
Is there a cost associated with doing those background checks?
absolutely there's a cost associated with it. I mean, there's a legal prohibition at this point as to why we cannot use the FBI's database. And again, it's going to require legislation for us to be able to gain access to that. And to this date, Congress has not acted on that proposal. And so again, we have on our own initiative worked with LexisNexis to obtain criminal history information. We will begin piloting the use of that criminal history information in the next 2-3 weeks or so. And so we are well on our way. We absolutely agree with you that self-reporting is not sufficient. We have to have a way to verify the information that's being provided to us, and we will begin piloting the use of the information that we receive from LexisNexis within the next couple of weeks.
Well, I know if you buy a gun from a gun store in this country, they've got a process. It takes about 90 seconds, and they can tell if someone is eligible to buy a gun or prohibited from buying a gun. And it's a pretty quick check. And it would seem to me that that would we need to figure out something that works in this case too.
We could really use your help in that regard.
There's, for as long as I can remember, there's examples of people who abuse people for personal gain, and it always surfaces in a newspaper story.
I think the Democrat Congress is holding us up. We have a provision to do that.
I don't think we're holding you up. No.
Okay, well, we'll put it out there again. What do you think?
Mr. Bertoni, you went into great lengths regarding the long-term planning, and which is a very important aspect of this, given the number of people, and I think Mr. Johnson mentioned folks with Alzheimer's. Those numbers are staggering. And the truth of the matter is, with my generation, there's a lot of us who are probably going to fall into the category of needing some help along the way. And that's important. But I don't think it's the whole answer. There needs to be a lot more done to protect this vulnerable group of people. Does the Social Security folks, do the Social Security folks have the resources that they need to adequately protect these people and to do the background checks and to make sure?
I think it's reasonable to say that given the long-term hiring freeze, the attrition in the agency, that they could use some additional staff. I don't know what that number is. I also think they haven't made a good business case as to the number of staff they need, the level of effort that they're going to have to be confronting down the road.
There's two things. One is, do they have enough money to do to do the caseload that they have now. And then the issue that you raised, the long-term planning, if the answer is no to the first one, they certainly don't have the money to grow their program to accommodate this increase in population.
I can't say whether they have adequate money now. Like I said, I think they have asked for more resources. I do know within their existing pot of resources, they could work smarter. And again, this issue of, self-reported information.
We need to. I think we need to drill down on this a little bit more, Mr. Chairman, because everybody can work smarter with the resources we have. You can in your office, I can in mine. You can in your home, I can in my home, I can in my own business. That's just that we can stipulate that, but we need to find out what they need and make sure they get it.
And that's why we've asked them to sort of do an assessment of the demographic characteristics of the beneficiary population, what their impairments will look like, what their levels of services will need, how that translates to level of effort, number of rep payees and staff needed, people, processes, and technologies, and then to come to you with a good number in terms of what that will cost. They need a good business case, so you have the opportunity to make a data-driven decision as to the amount and whether you want to provide that money, and that's what we say in the report.
Thank you. The gentleman's time's expired. Mr. T-Berry, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Bertoni. Kind of following up on Mr. Sorry about that. Mr. Thompson's point in terms of self-reporting. What are your thoughts about either a FBI background check or something to determine criminality?
Sure. I have been up here quite a few times talking about a lot of different aspects of SSA's program, and I've always said that the self-reporting aspect of many of their programs is the weak link in the internal control chain. So that needs to be addressed across the board with SSA's programs. The fact that they are now planning to access Accurate and to do those checks, that's a good thing. Again, what we're concerned about is that it's taken 3 years to get there, and it may take a considerable amount of time to get enough data to understand whether this program is actually accomplishing its goal of preventing misuse.
How about Social Security's coordination with other programs? How can that tie into this
Sure.
and be improved?
We've long said that they could coordinate with state courts, guardianship programs. We have a recommendation in 2011 that they should do everything possible to try to share, have a two-way sharing agreement with the states. And to the extent that they believe they need additional legislative authority to work around the Privacy Act restrictions, Social Security Act restrictions, that they should work with the Congress to try to get those authorities. So there is opportunity to leverage resources for both programs to better screen their rep payees and their guardians up front, and to ensure that they're bringing in good people into the program.
Now, you have found that they have not engaged in long-term planning in the representative payee program. In your opinion, what would be the risks of not doing that, and why do you think they haven't done that?
The short answer is they could be caught flat-footed in terms of being able to provide service delivery down the road. The risks, are evident. This program is growing. The number of aged beneficiaries will be up around 72 million in 2025. They need to get out in front of these issues, and part of that is, again, assessing the demographic characteristics of their population, what they'll need, the staff that will be needed, the people, processing technology, number of rep payees, and the golden answer here is how much it'll cost.
Ms. Green, kind of following up on the GAO report, what are the hurdles that we can help you with to accomplish what Mr. Bertoni and the GAO have identified?
So I would agree with Mr. Bertoni that the one area that we definitely can improve in is the coordination with state and federal agencies. And that was a few of the recommendations of the NAS recommendations, and Acting Commissioner Colvin has taken that challenge to heart. I mean, she has personally reached out to her counterparts at the other federal agencies to engage them in dialogue about how we can do a better job of coordinating with those agencies, how we can share data in an automated way. These issues have been discussed at the Elder Justice Coordinating Council. We are trying to understand exactly what the barriers are. Mr. Bertoni indicated there's some Privacy Act implications there as well. We're trying to have a really good understanding as to what those barriers are so that we can be poised to present to the Congress and to this committee some legislative proposals that will help us move forward. And she has set the tone, and we've taken that charge. And with that said, we have engaged ACAS, the Administrative Conference of the United States, to help us engage the state courts and some of the state agencies so that we can have a better understanding as to how they select payees, how they monitor their payees, so that we can get a good gauge for whether or not there's some data to be shared. So we absolutely agree with you. We can do a better job there, and we've already started the course. In terms of the long-term strategy, I think I must just put some things into context here, okay? So for the last 3 years, we have received $1 billion less than the president's budget. We've lost over 10,000 employees since fiscal year 11, and we will lose more this fiscal year. We currently expend 1,900 work years on rep payee activities alone. That investment in resources and representative payee activities will not increase unless we receive additional funding and resources from Congress. So until we receive those additional resources, we have to think more strategically about how we target our resources. And this is where we need your help, because right now we are beholden to statutory provisions that in its time were probably very relevant and very pertinent. But the reality of it is that we are reviewing 6.5 million accounting reports every single year. And the results are that in very limited circumstances are we finding any misuse as a result of reviewing those forms. And NAS has determined, our IG has determined, that spending approximately 600 work years reviewing these forms is not a good use of resources, but it's mandated by law. So that's where we could use your help, because we need some flexibility there so that we can figure out the best way, the strategic way to use those 1,900 resources to protect our beneficiaries.
Thank you. My time's expired, and we look forward to working with you. I would just put one cautionary note out there, not to malign your agency. Thank you for what you do, but when scandals like the Social Security conferences spending millions of dollars hit the media, people back home, I know where I live, it paints us all, whether you're at the IRS, whether you're in Congress, whether you're at Social Security, people tend to think we all have all this bunch of money around. And so obviously as you as a senior person at Social Security, focus on those resources. I just throw that cautionary note out there, the challenges that we face in the future on funding. Yield back.
Thank you. You know, we built another facility for you in North Carolina, and it seems to me you got some extra resources in Baltimore, but you're doing this in Wilkes-Barre, and I still don't understand that division of effort, but it seems to me you probably do have some resources if you just look around. Mr. Renacci, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for your testimony. I do have some personal experience. I operated nursing homes for almost 20 years, so I understand how difficult it is sometimes to get a payee, and I realize the challenges that you face. And I think in operating a business, though, sometimes you have to use the resources smarter, and I heard you both, many of you say that. So I think that's the key, and we want to help you. We want to be able to work with you to come up with some of those answers. Mr. Bertini, you talked in your testimony that Social Security has tried to recruit more payees, and I understand that some of the experts interviewed talked about contracting out that responsibility. Can you tell me a little more about what the experts thought about that idea? And
Sure. I think the consensus was that perhaps this was resources that SSA probably, scarce resources that they didn't want to dedicate to this function, given the track record and already in being able to recruit additional rep payees. One suggestion was to use contractors who SSA could use to go out, recruit, train, and hold them accountable for developing a pool of qualified candidates. I don't think there was consensus, and that was the absolute way to go, but it was an area to explore and potentially to pilot it, proof of concept it, to see if it's, number one, cost-effective, feasible, and that they were the best model to pursue it.
Mrs. Green, what is the, what are your, have you analyzed that option? What have you thought about it? Was there any conclusions made?
So as I mentioned, we have established a strategic team that will look at all of the options and recommendations presented by a GAO, and that's one of the options that we will explore. But the reality of it is that, and again, we will evaluate the cost benefits and the feasibility of those options as well. But the reality of it is that if you contract out that work, it still requires funds. And so unless we receive additional funds from Congress to dedicate to this effort, we are already faced with making some very difficult decisions with the limited resources and with the limited funds that we have. And while it is definitely a nice thing to do, we are closing field offices, we're shutting them down earlier in the day, we are losing staff, we're making some very tough decisions. And discretionary spending on things that are really nice to do, I'm not quite certain will rise to the top.
Well, keep in mind, and again, I appreciate that you're even looking at it. Sometimes contracting out can help eliminate some of the cost and burden that the administration has. So, you know, it's not extra money sometimes, it's using resources more appropriately. You also mentioned the pilot program, and I believe that pilot program was put in place to bar individuals from that committed certain crimes from being ineligible payees. GAO recommended to assess whether or not the criminal bar pilot actually reduces the incidence of benefit misuse in the long run. Has the SSA implemented that, you know, that recommendation of assessing, you know, some type of program to, you know, understand whether it's working?
We absolutely will evaluate the pilot. Right now, again, the pilot is has been implemented in 4 states. Right now, we're trying to, again, it's all based at this point on self-reporting. And so what we're trying to get a feel for are the various state variations in the way crimes are defined, trying to ensure that there's some consistent application for this policy. And then within the next 2 weeks, we will then also allow them to access the LexisNexis Accurate data. And at that point, we will then evaluate whether the use of the barred crimes list as well as the use of the LexisNexis Accurate tool will actually prevent misuse. And so we will evaluate both of those pilots together.
So the answer is that's something you're
absolutely.
Okay.
We've concurred with that recommendation.
And I know there was talk about, I think Mr. Serrano talked about representative payees commingling funds. Can you tell me what SSA is doing to reduce these occurrences?
We use them as teachable moments. And so when those types of circumstances come to our attention, commingling of funds, payees failing to notify the agency when a beneficiary is
But if you find that's occurring, what do you do? I mean, I guess
we contact the payee and we use it as a teachable moment. We contact them, we explain to them the rules and the procedures with regard to how to handle the funds, that they must keep them in separate accounts, what are the rules for reporting work. So we use those
but
as
that's
teachable
after.
moments.
I was actually looking proactively instead of reactively. Okay. Proactively, what are you doing?
When an applicant is approved to serve as a rep payee, we sit down with them, we talk to them about their roles and responsibilities, and we provide them with material, again, that emphasizes what their roles and responsibilities are. So we provide training to them before they even embark on their responsibilities.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Becerra. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the witnesses, thank you so much. Enlightening, very enlightening. Ms. Green, coordinating with other agencies, you mentioned that your SSA is trying to do that more. That's very important. Can we do something? Can you give us a report back soon on what's being done? I think one of the frustrations we have is that we only get the testimony and we hear about the issues, we hear about some of the progress, but we're not there on the ground the way you are. Can you agree to come back to us at some point soon being a reasonable interpretation of the word, so that we know that SSA really is trying to figure out a way to coordinate better with some of these agencies so that we can deal with all of these issues that come up with these representative payees. I don't think any one of us wants to hear any more stories of individuals who had their money swindled from their hands and pockets. So anything that you can do to accelerate an opportunity for us to sit with you to find out what specifically SSA is doing to try to better coordinate with agencies that are relevant to this issue. That'd be
You
great.
have my commitment.
Excellent. You mentioned you were, I thought, very clear in some of your remarks about the difficulties that SSA faces when it comes to meeting the challenges here. Quick question. My sense is that dealing with representative payees, making sure that there's a appropriate representative payee, making sure that there's good follow through and that the beneficiary is getting good service from the representative payee is not just some paper task that goes quickly. It sounds to me like it's labor intense on the part of SSA.
Oh, it's labor intensive, and pretty much all of those requirements require face-to-face interaction. And so again, we're engaging in face-to-face interaction when we're making a capability determination. We're having face-to-face interaction when we're making suitability determinations. We're having face-to-face interaction when we're in training these payees. We're having face-to-face interaction when we're out there doing the on-site reviews, conducting these targeted reviews. And so there's a lot of face-to-face interaction that can't be done via automation, but requires some dedicated, trained employees to do the job for us.
So you're helping these representative or prospective representative payees understand the law and getting trained up so they can do this. You're interviewing these folks to make sure that they are qualified. You're spending a lot of time with them.
Absolutely. Again, we spend like 1,900 work years on rep payee activity alone.
And this is done mostly through your local offices, your field offices.
Absolutely, they are.
Now, what was the statistic you mentioned about the staffing right now in your local offices? What's going on as a result of these budget cuts to your SSA budget?
Well, we're closing offices. We're shortening hours. There has been service deterioration on all of our service channels. And so, look, the budget has impacted Social Security in very significant ways. Our commissioner is having to make some very tough decisions on how to spend the limited resources that we have. And allocating resources to things that are just nice to do, we've been told is not acceptable. We are focusing on that which is mandatory, which I'm sure you can appreciate.
Mr. Serrano, thank you for being here. Question for you. In your opinion, and you've done this for quite some time, working with folks and representing folks who are disabled, who need assistance, what's been your relationship with SSA over the years? Are they working this in a way that gives you confidence that they're trying to make sure that they do the best job possible when it comes to finding a good representative payee for Americans who need that help?
Yeah, absolutely. They're doing the best job they can with the resources that are available. The reviews that we do are given to us by Social Security. They have already targeted the rep payee for additional review. We go in and we do then some labor-intensive stuff with face-to-face interviews with the rep payee as well as with the beneficiaries. In Michigan, we've served over 56, done over 56 reviews, and interviewed over 208 beneficiaries. We're finding that about 48% of the reviews that we do, we have question about some of the financial dealings. So they were already targeted by Social Security Administration. We're doing the additional follow-up and giving them back to the Social Security.
Well, I hope you'll continue to do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Bertoni, one final question I have. Ms. Green mentioned flexibility, that there's some requirements that they have that seem to be somewhat outdated, that if they had more flexibility, they could actually be smarter in the way they do their work. Any comment on that?
Yeah, I think several of the options that we put on the table would require a law change, would allow them to calibrate their monitoring, to calibrate their reviews of the accounting reports. Not all rep payees are created equal. Some are more risky than others.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to take a risk-based approach to this population. So we would support that. I'd support it in other programs and other times I've testified in other aspects. So it's a way to work smarter. I understand the resource issue, but again, to wring out efficiencies from what they've been dealt. It's a policy question as to whether there will be more resources, but in the interim, there's opportunities here. And I think through their legislative office, legislative proposals, they could work with the Congress to create some flexibilities.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you'll back the balance of my time.
There's a lot of paperwork that goes into that, and that seems to me we overdo it in some areas and we don't identify the areas that really need to be looked at. But if y'all can figure out a way to do it, we'll sure help you. Mr. Brady, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One, this is an important hearing to hold. Thank you for doing that. Secondly, I don't buy the excuse the sequester made me do it. This has been a problem that's been around 4 years, and recommendations to solve it has been around and languished 4 years. They didn't start in March, and I don't think we've taken the adequate steps to protect these payees. And I know, Ms. Green, you talked about not having enough money for discretionary activities, but it seems to me these people handle the money for seniors with dementia, with Alzheimer's, with no capability of taking care of themselves. If that isn't a priority within your agency, what is a priority? I want to put this in perspective, just so that I understand what we're dealing with. We have 6 million representative payees currently today, and it's growing. How many cases of fraud or abuse were identified last year?
Pulling out some numbers.
Sure.
So in fiscal year 12, we referred to the Office of Inspector General about 16,000 cases, of which they opened approximately 562 cases, and sentencing resulted in approximately 261 of them. Thus far, this fiscal year, we have referred to the Office of Inspector General 7,600 cases, of which 136 have been sentenced so far.
What are the numbers this year, did you say, Ms. Green?
Thus far, this fiscal year, about 7,700.
Of the 16,000 that were referenced, why were so few pursued? Out of 16,000 referred, why were 562 taken action on? What was the criteria?
I would have to defer to the Office of Inspector General in that regard. Okay. But obviously, there are additional cases that are not all cases are referred to the Office of Inspector General.
But the more serious ones
The more serious ones are. And so we could provide for the record the exact number, the total universe of misuse cases.
Well, what I'm actually
years.
looking at is, of the 16,000 serious cases that were referred, why were only 562 pursued? And what criteria was used, and what dropped them off the radar going forward? Secondly, is that consistent with the year before? I mean, is there a trend occurring in the number of cases identified?
Unfortunately,
smaller, larger?
Correct. Unfortunately, I do not have fiscal year 11 data, but we would be more than willing to provide that information to you for the record.
Can I ask this, Mr. Bertoni, do you think, just using the 16,000 figure, I don't know what percentage that would be, do you think that is the range of fraud and abuse, or would you, and I'm not looking for a number, but what's your gut feel on the real problem we've got?
I don't have real confidence in that number. It's only fraud and abuse once you're aware of it, and it's only fraud once you've obtained a conviction. So it's a cascading effect. If you don't have procedures in place to find it that are sufficient, I don't know if you can know the universe. I think it's probably larger than some of the 1% figures that I've seen kicked around, but I don't know what that number is. But given what I know about what they do, their processes for monitoring and overseeing, I could see where it would be difficult to capture the full range of fraud and abuse.
Could it be double that amount, do you believe?
Possibly, but I don't want to.
No. I'm just trying to get the whole. And the single most important thing we could do to identify that range and prevent it would be what?
I think moving away from self-reporting and relying on recipients and beneficiaries to do the right thing is key. I'll give an example. The Social Security Protection Act of 2004 prohibits anybody that spent more than a year in jail from cashing the check of another. And that would be, Ms. Weston would have fallen into that category years ago. She chose not to report the fact that she was incarcerated for over a year. And there were no processes in place to identify that. So we take this all the way back. Perhaps this would have never happened had there been a more rigorous verification process in place.
Do you have the discussions today about whether it's tying into the background check when you're purchasing a weapon, or under the President's new health care law, the new central data hub has access to from five different agencies, including Department of Justice, checking on incarceration, and other criminal background issues. Are there some readily available avenues that we could tie into without hiring 10,000 more workers?
I think you could tie into a lot more additional databases that aren't even classified as criminal. The Do Not Pay list in Treasury has a range of databases that the administration could use to identify folks who are perhaps not of good character, at least, if not convicted of a crime, bankruptcy, other types of financial type of
red flags that we ought to be
correct.
aware of.
There are databases. The database that they're tapping into, a great, I don't want to call it a first step, a great step towards increasing integrity. Again, not perfect, not entirely comprehensive, but it's more than they have now.
Okay.
Thank
Chairman,
you.
thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all for being here. I was reading in the overview, and it says the SSA appoints a representative payee when a beneficiary is either under the age of 15 or unable to manage or direct management of his or her benefits. And if I'm reading this correctly, and it says the SSA seeks whenever possible to identify a family member, a friend, a legal guardian, a conservator, or any person who shows a strong concern for the beneficiary. And these people are often referred to as individual payees. Now, screen, 85% of these representative payees are parents or spouses, is my understanding, and over half of those representative payees are minor children. So we know they have this qualification of being a family member, friend, or having a genuine concern. And every year, these families have to submit a report to Social Security about how the benefits are being used. Now, in 2008 and 2009, SSA supported legislation to Congress to exempt parents and spouses from this requirement, saying that there is little evidence that these payees are prone to misusing benefits. So does SSA still support that type of proposal with appropriate safeguards?
So again, I will mention that just the accounting mechanism, just generally speaking, isn't effective, whether it's for parents or whether it's for any of the payees.
But I'm thinking if qualifying these folks is a problem, and if we know, look, if it's my son or daughter, or my wife, or somebody that I have great concern for, individual concern, because I think Americans are absolutely always want to protect our most vulnerable. And this is a program that's supposed to do that. And then the question becomes, okay, we're doing that and we're allotting money to that, but the people who are supposed to handle it for these folks that can't do it themselves, if we've qualified them in that way, then doing this report, would that not lighten your burden of these things that you're trying to find out? Because if there's little belief that they're actually misusing the funds, then wouldn't it be easy to move those folks out of that category?
From a policy perspective, that makes all the world of sense to me, and it also saves about 270 work years for us to redirect that in a more targeted way. But the trade-off to that is that we now have data available that we did not have available in 2009 to actually evaluate whether the underlying premise is true, and that family members are have a lesser likelihood or a lesser propensity towards misusing the funds. We now have data that would allow us to test that underlying premise, and that is exactly, I think, what we need to do before we submit that proposal.
I agree with you.
again.
I've watched these folks. Getting paid to do a job is one thing. Having your heart in the job is quite something else. Now, if we're able to do that, if we're able to set aside parents and people that really have a genuine concern, how many, that would lighten your load, how many, and you don't have to answer me today, but how many people would that lighten or free up to do other things that you need to do?
No, that's exactly, and that's why that proposal is so appealing to us at SSA. It will
Okay.
allow us to save work years dedicated to that process, and again, use those resources in a more targeted way to identify payees who have a higher propensity to misuse the funds.
Sure.
But again, I think that we need to step back now that we have data available and evaluate to see whether or not the underlying premise is true. And again, there are trade-offs, and there is no perfect option. And there may be situations where parents misuse the funds, but again, it's a trade-off, and we have to make sure we strike that right balance.
But that is considerably reduced when it's a parent or a relative.
Custodial parent or a custodial spouse.
Yeah, and I was looking at the numbers, and Mr. Bertoni, maybe you can help me with this, because if I'm looking what we pay these folks to be the payee. And I see it says up to 10% of the monthly benefit, and I guess this is for what social organizations, or $76 per month if the person is an experienced drug addiction or alcoholism. Who do you get for that kind of money? I mean, for $4 a day, who do
It's
you get?
actually 10% of the benefit amount, up to $39 maximum. So
$39?
maximum for most
For what period of time? For how much?
per month.
Per month.
For each
$39 a
beneficiary.
month?
It's 10% up to $39 of the
So who do you
benefit amount.
attract?
I can't speak to. That's probably a more better question for us to say. But I would say that
Well, shoot, that's just over, what, it was $1.10 a day? You know, we talk about people not wanting to work for minimum wage. This isn't, I mean, I'm not trying to be, I mean, seriously.
well, there's no question that it's difficult to find.
Well, there's a
payees.
correlation between what you're willing to pay and what you're willing to get. I mean, in my position in life, there's nothing more expensive than cheap labor. If we have untrained people, if we have uneducated people, if we have people who are not qualified and we have them in positions of authority and responsibility, and then we wonder why it fails, we need to go back. This is like Education 101. So I would appreciate anything you're doing. And I got to tell you, I think we do wonderful work. But the numbers are getting so overwhelming. This population is growing. If we can't handle today and we can't get good people doing it, what are we going to do in the future? Right. And I don't know that you can throw enough money at it. I just don't know that it's fixable. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. But thank you all for being here. And Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you for your questions. I don't know if I'd do it for $1 a day, would you?
Only if it was my wife, daughter, or the grandchildren. No, seriously, I'm being honest about it. Hey, listen, I'd do it for nothing. We do that for nothing. But $1.19, I don't think I'm that, Mr. Becerra, you and I aren't going to do it, right? I mean, I'd love to help. Sometimes our hearts are willing, but our wallets are weak.
You got it.
We got to find a way to fix this.
Mr. Griffin, you're recognized.
Great question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It gets back, Mr. Kelly, to your earlier comment about if your heart's in it. I mean, you may be willing to do it, but you're not going to do it for the money. That's for sure. Thank you all for being here today. Appreciate all that y'all do. I understand that as a general matter, every agency would like more money. I've never found one agency that is not interested in having more money. So we get that. That's sort of a constant. But we just got through discussing, separate from the money, you just got through discussing with Mr. Kelly a way to innovate and to use money more wisely and time more wisely. And I'm sure that there are 100 more examples that we can find. Some of those you can implement, and some of them we have to do legislatively. I would encourage you to, if there's ever, through the proper channels, of course, but if there's ever an opportunity to innovate and to do better, and where we have to do something statutorily, let us know, because we certainly want to facilitate that. And I'm reminded of the hearing when we talked about the 1976 accounting system that Social Security has. So clearly there's room to improve there. But I wanted to ask you about how you communicate with representative payees. What is the range of ways? I assume obviously mail and phone and all, but very specifically, how do you communicate with these representative payees, and what improvements do you think that we can be making in our ability to communicate with them? Because it would seem to me that the more frequent communication you can have with people, the more of a check, or the better the quality of the service. Could you comment on that, please?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And so our first interaction with the rep payee is at the point in time when they're applying to serve as the rep payee. And we use that as an opportunity to make sure that they understand, before we actually appoint them as the rep payee, that they understand what their responsibilities are and what their obligations are to SSA in that capacity. Once they are appointed the representative payee, again, we have another conversation with them about roles, responsibilities, expectations. And then we provide to them a point of contact in the field office to whom they can go and direct questions if indeed they have any. Obviously, when we are conducting our on-site reviews, that's another opportunity to engage the rep payee. And again, instances of misuse is very rare, and so, but there are other issues that may arise during those reviews. For instance, perhaps commingling of funds, not reporting overpayments. And again, that's a teachable moment that we utilize to engage the rep payee to remind them of their responsibilities. And obviously our partner here at NDRN, they're the boots on the ground. They are interacting with the rep payees as well. And so we try to utilize not only our face-to-face opportunities with them to engage them, to answer their questions, to provide training to them, but we have our partners here at NDRN as well. And just one further point is that we have developed quite a number of training materials for the rep payees to utilize, be it pamphlets or brochures. We have a very informative website that they can go to obtain information as well, to understand their reporting obligations. We've interacted with many of the advocate groups to help us disseminate information to the rep payees, in addition to trying to get more individuals to volunteer to serve as rep payees. So we try to utilize all of the resources and the networks that we have at the state and local and the federal levels to educate the rep payees, but we rely primarily on our face-to-face interactions at the local level.
Do you want to add to that?
The face-to-face interactions are critical. The information we get is information that was given to us by Social Security. We go out and then do the additional follow-up interviews with the rep payee as well as the beneficiary, and then we report back to Social Security as to where we think they need additional follow-up. So yeah, the face-to-face stuff is absolutely critical.
And I apologize if I missed this earlier, but what sort of filtering or background checking goes on here? Anything at all in terms of criminal record or drug tests or anything like that?
Right.
We don't do that. That's done when they apply for the rep payee program through Social Security.
Okay, so that all can...
Right, and so as we talked about earlier, right now we're relying primarily on self-reporting. We do have information available to us about whether or not the applicant is currently imprisoned or whether or not they're a fugitive felon. But we have been working with Senator Casey to try to get some legislation passed to grant us access to the FBI's National Crime Information Center information. We've not had any success there, but we are working currently with LexisNexis Accurate to receive criminal history data, and we will be utilizing that information on a pilot basis within the next few weeks, just to verify the type of information that we're receiving and basically verify that against some of the information that's being self-reported.
I mean, it's not quite an employer-employee relationship, but there are a lot of analogies,
Sure.
Certainly. Looks like I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing.
The British call it a sticky wicket. Thank you to our witnesses for your testimony today, and to the members who are still here. I want to be sure this important program is given the attention that Americans expect and deserve. Therefore, I ask that within 30 days, Social Security submit to the subcommittee its response to the recommendations of the National Academy's report, please, and the one on improving the Social Security Representative Payee Program. And if a recommendation is not being implemented, we want to know why, please. We've heard a number of legislative changes to improve the Representative Payee Program. I look forward to working with all of you, and hope you'll come back, Mr. Bertoni, and with better comments next time. And I appreciate the testimony of all three of you, and thank you for being here. With that, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Thank you.
Thank you.